Bloom bonus. Bloom bonus. Yes, I think it'll be good. We are talking about the 20th annual Conference on Crimes Against Women, or as I like to just refer to as the CCAW.
It makes me think of Schitt's Creek every time you do it. The crowaning.
Yeah, when I got back from the conference at the end of May, I purposely didn't share with you a bunch of details because I wanted to make an episode of it. So I'm really excited to share with you about the more in depth about how it went and the feels and the people and all of it.
So give us a, 10,000 foot elevator pitch explanation of like what this conference is. I guess I didn't realize it was the 20th annual. That's long standing. Where it was this year, how you heard about it.
So I heard about it on the Financial Feminist podcast. I forgot the episode. It's one of the earlier episodes, I think from 2022 or 2023. But if you all have not listened to the Financial Feminist podcast, I don't care what your reproductive system looks like, men, women, anyone in between. It is an amazing podcast that teaches you about managing your money. And if you're someone like me who's just completely lost when it comes to managing money and is also very impulsive and all those things, I've learned so much. And this episode that I was listening to was about domestic violence and financial abuse. And Jan Langbin, I think is how you say her last name, Jan Edgar Langbin. She was Tori Dunlap's guest. Tori Dunlap is the host of Financial Feminist. She was the guest, and she is the CEO and founder of Genesis Women's Shelter and Support in Texas. And she also co-founded the Conference on Crimes Against Women with the FBI and the Dallas Police Department. So that's how this conference originated, and that's how I heard about it. And when I heard about it, I looked it up, and I saw that Tara Petito and Nicole Schmidt were going to be one of like the keynote speakers. And then I started looking at the workshops and just information about it. And I just knew I had to go. Like I was like, this is such a perfect opportunity to get information and also network about the podcast and just meet people. And yeah, so I registered, again, impulsive. I registered like the day of, and I'm really happy I did because it was so impactful. But to answer your question from earlier, the purpose of the Conference on Crimes Against Women is to gather people to learn about best practices for investigation and prosecution. So I think that's an important thing to consider, is that the conference is especially meant for people who are involved in the legal system and the judicial system, also for therapists, counselors, prosecutors, advocates. So yeah, definitely a room full of people who I realized quickly, most, if not all the people there have been impacted by abuse in some way. And that part was very clear from day one. And I was like, oh shit, this is heavy. There is a heaviness in the air, but it also feels hopeful and exciting to be here.
I love that you were surprised that a conference about violent abuse was heavy. But I also think it's kind of a perfect description of like what we're doing on our podcast, right? Is like it's heavy, but it's hopeful. Hopefully. Hopefully hopeful. And I think it's also an important distinction to make that the conference focused a lot on legal justice and prosecution, because I do think there's a couple of camps, right? And I think we have met people in different camps when it comes to talking about abuse or violence. And some are very prevention based. Like we don't want to talk about lawsuits and the ability to press charges. We want to prevent this thing from happening in the first place by having better training on the front end or trying to enact systemic cultural change, like dismantling the patriarchy, right? And then there's other people that are like, okay, awesome. I also would like there to be universal health care, but that's not going to happen. So let's like figure out a way to like deal with the reality we live in. I'm not saying one is more right than the other, but I think it is an important distinction to make that the conference that you attended is specifically surrounded around the idea, or my understanding from what you just said, I guess, around legal justice or like legal reform. Because definitely for a lot of people in our country, especially right now, you can't call the police, right?
Mm.
Like you, depending on your situation, like you could end up being arrested when you're trying to call, quote unquote, the good guys to come and help you because you're being abused in one way or another. So I don't know. I just think it's an interesting thing to delineate because there are a lot of different camps. And there's sometimes I feel like I wish those camps worked closer together, because I feel like
Mm.
I was in a few meetings over the last few years where it was like, we all want the same thing, but half the room is yelling about prevention. The other half is, yelling about punishment after the fact. And those are kind of, I think, all parts of the same puzzle. Anyways, did that subject come up at all within that conference?
Yeah, the conference was introduced. There was like a interview style Q&A with Tara Petito and Nicole Schmidt. And Nicole Schmidt, the really close friend of the Petito family. And so there was someone like interviewing interviewing them, and one of the things that Tara Petito said is part of the problem is that all these groups are working in silos and not talking to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and that is part of the solution is to find a way to bring everyone together, everyone within these different areas and departments. Maybe the path there is different, but the goal we would hope is to protect people, to protect families,
Mm-hmm.
to protect women and children. So yeah, I think that I was really glad to hear that come up on the first day, and it was refreshing. I'm human. I have my personal biases, and I know that one of my biases are against cops and law enforcement officials. And so I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical when I'm around them. And I was skeptical when I was like very much noticing, okay, you're definitely a cop, you're law enforcement. Like, are you here for the right reasons? Are you here just to have PD? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And the first day before the introduction of the conference, I sat down, and there was a man who sat down a couple seats away from me, and he just started small talk and was asking me what my connection was to the conference and like why I was there. And I said I'm a survivor, and told him some of the stuff that I've been working on and that we had been working on. And after I told him I was a survivor, he shared that his mom is also a survivor. He grew up with abuse in his life and that he had to defend her growing up, and now he's a cop. And that's what I
Mm-hmm.
mean. Like, I think that's when I realized it was heavy. Like, I and you know me, sometimes I just go on autopilot mode and then deal with the consequences later. But like after hearing that, I think I did have that moment of, oh shit, like all of us, everyone here has a
Mm-hmm.
story like this person next to me and like me. And it makes sense that they go into this field of work. But yeah, it just kind of floored me, leveled me a little bit to
Yeah.
reflect on that.
Well, even I think, even if that, police officer hadn't been directly impacted like on a personal level with family, there is also the personal impact of having to work these cases, like I can't imagine day in, day out, I feel like we've talked about that even with politicians that we've been working with, who are year after year trying to get legislation changed, and they're working with survivors like you and I. But with police, it's even more intense, right? Because they're the ones they're having to do the interviews that you and I had to do and listen to all the gruesome details. And they're having to ask people questions that they know are re traumatizing the victim, but they have to ask them if we're going to, if they're going to try to press charges against this person. Like that would also be traumatizing to have to be like, I spent 8 hours today listening to a 10-year-old describe being raped by her dad. That's
Yeah.
rough. Like there is also that side of it too, is, I think a lot of the lawyers and the doctors and uh police and Child protective services, like all those people that work in those systems, like there's also a price that they also pay just having to consume that much horror every day. And I always wonder how those people just go home and like
Yeah.
do their laundry. I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like I don't get it. I don't know how you do that. Like,
Hopefully they're all seeing therapists.
yeah.
That's yeah. But yeah, it's definitely set the tone. And I feel like my guard was down a little bit because I was a little, feeling some kind of way. I wasn't sure what, but it was a big deal, I think, for me personally to be there. And I think after having this exchange with this white man next to me, I felt like, okay, community, yay. And then Jan got on stage and introduced a conference and so the conference takes place in Texas. I don't know if it takes place in Texas every year, but it was in Texas this last or in May. And it's not my first state that I would want to visit, especially right now. And so that was very much in mind when Jan got on stage, and she was very blatant about the fact that at the time it was pretty recent that the Trump administration had said that you can't use words like women or
Mm.
gender. Organizations that rely on government funding are now trying to see where they have those words so they could take it out of their contracts and their programs. And anyway, Jan was like, "We're not afraid to say those words here." And it was awesome to see the crowd just clapping. And then she gave a shout out to the Canadians in the group because there was a lot of Canadians, and we were all clapping for our Canadian friends and letting them know that we love you, Canada. So I felt, yeah, like very early on that morning, just so excited to keep meeting people and to keep, yeah, just being in this energy, in this community.
So you kind of told us about how you got there and like the first day. What was so I'm assuming there was a bunch of different lectures. What would you say was, some of the highlights for you as far as the lecture subject matters or speakers?
Ooh, yeah. So I think I went to a total of 9 sessions. There were definitely a few standout ones. The day one, I attended 3 sessions. First one was about grooming tactics but more grooming tactics in relationships between two like adults.
Mhm.
And so that one was interesting. And then there was one about mental health programs and bridging the gap to help offenders get back into society. That one was a little hard to sit through because I just kept thinking about the teacher and of course my mind is like, nope, you deserve to be in jail. You do not get a second chance. You already had multiple chances.
Mhm.
But it did challenge me. It did challenge me to because I do believe that most people are worthy of redemption and that there should be opportunities for people who of low level crimes and nonviolent crimes to be able to reintegrate into society. But I don't know. I think repeat offenders of abuse, I think part of the problem is that they're not put away. They're not serving time that they should be serving, and then they come back out and sometimes the violence escalates to murder.
Mhm.
It just really got me thinking.
Well, that goes
Mhm.
back to like kind of what we've talked about before, and I don't know if we've talked about it here, but like there is no incentive in our legal system for an abuser or any perpetrator of any crime to be honest, right, about what they did. And it's pretty cut or dry of like either they get put in jail or nothing happens. And there is no in between. And it's like, okay, why can't the in between be this person has to go to counseling? This person has to go get assessed if whether or not they're a risk as a pedophile. And then there is some kind of actual treatment program for people who are pedophiles. Like, I don't know, I'm sure there's people out there who know better answers than me, and maybe there isn't a treatment for that, and maybe it's just a blight on the human mind that can never be unraveled. But it does seem like it's not a and I think anybody would agree it's not a perfect system, it's not working great, but it's like there is just nothing between those two extremes of you get to go back to your life, maybe a little bit socially shamed, but nothing happens to you, or you're in prison where you again are not being treated and you're
Yeah.
not being counseled, and you might just spend years stewing and getting more angry so that you're going to come out and maybe be an even more violent offender than you were in the first place. It's an interesting conundrum. I mean, when you really get into it, because it's like as survivors, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I wish our abuser was in jail because I truly believe that he deserves to be because of what he did to us, but he isn't, and that's a reality that we have to deal with. And even if he was, I guess if he was, I would still feel like people would be safer than they are right now because he's just like out on those streets talking to who knows
Mhm.
who, like,
Yeah.
I
Or
don't
the
know.
internet, not
I
even the streets.
know. I
He's on
know,
the internet
dude. The
talking to who know
internet,
who.
it stresses me out. I try not to think about it. I try not to think
Okay.
about it.
Let's try not to think about it. And then the last session of the day, I was so excited for. It was called How to Make Testifying a Healing Experience for the Victim.
Hmm.
And the presenters were Jordan Lawson and Ruth Guerreiro. And I was really excited about it because there was a moment along this journey that I thought that I would have a chance to testify, and I really was thinking about how I felt about it.
Mm.
Was I really did I really want to do it, or did I just feel like I wanted to do it because of how mad I was? Would I have preferred to not do it? I was really looking forward to this session, and it was a really, really good session. They were so relatable. The presenters were so approachable. You could tell that they were like their friends in real life. So it felt comfortable. Like it was really resonating with me. And like my mind was so into it and, for lack of a better word, excited about what I was hearing. But my body was reacting very differently. And I feel like I was on the verge of having a panic attack. Like I was just getting so pumped up about all the things that they were saying, and like in my mind thinking like, yes, I relate to that. Oh my God, I feel so seen. But like physically, I was like, my body was super closed, my ankles were super tense, my calves were super tense. Like I could feel, it felt like my heart was racing, but I checked my heart rate and it wasn't. So I just was like, what is happening? And I ended up talking about it with my therapist that week, but it just was a reaction that I wasn't expecting. Like, why?
Hmm.
Because it didn't, it wasn't matching, what was going on in my head. I felt like were positive feelings and uplifting thoughts. And then physically, it was just so uncomfortable. So that was an experience.
Sometimes I mean, not sometimes, a lot of times in my life, I have that. And I have talked to my therapist about that. And she has said that, like, sometimes for people with anxiety, excitement can feel like anxiety. Like, it's the same sensation in your body sometimes, and so your body can kind of cross its wires where it's like, "I'm really excited about this thing," and my heart rate's up, and I'm feeling jazzed, and then your body's like, "Oh, that's our fear, that's our, like, trigger fear, flight, or freeze sensation. Like, let's freak the
Our
fuck out."
amygdala.
Yeah, like, it's like your body's all like, "Oh, I know how to do this. Let's go." And it's like, "No." Like, that's not what I wanna do right now. So, yeah, I sometimes feel like I have to be like, excitement feels like fear, Like, sometimes I have to be I have to say it out loud and really kinda, like, move my body around to kinda get it out. Um, so I get how that feels, but also, I think you and I both have experienced in this process of, like, sometimes we just Kool-Aid pitcher right through a wall and we're like, what could possibly go wrong here? And like we're just so like activated towards like
Yeah.
progress that I think sometimes we don't think about how
Mm.
it's actually going to feel doing the thing, or the toll or the price we're gonna have to pay to go through the thing. Cause yeah, like I just think like you and I both are like, yeah, I'll do a press conference. Yeah, I'll go do
Yeah.
this. And then
Yeah.
we do it and we're like, oh fuck. That was really intense.
Yeah,
I feel like I
exactly.
wasn't really ready to do that. Whoops.
Exactly. I felt very activated. There you go. That's a great word for it. My brain was so activated. Like I was like, I want to go back. I want to go back home and start working on a bunch of things. And one of the things that the presenters mentioned that got me so excited, they were talking about the cycle of violence, and I think it was Jordan who mentioned that she didn't like that one of the phases is called the honeymoon phase because honeymoon implies like it's a good situation. A
Yeah.
honeymoon is something you do after you do this really big life event where you are committing to life with another person. And so she suggested instead of honeymoon phase, changing it to manipulative kindness, which I
Mm.
fucking love because that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
kindness, but it's not genuine kindness. It's manipulative.
It's like
And
love
so that was
bombing.
yes, yeah, so that was one of the things that I was like, "Ah, yeah, I love that." Like, one, I love that you're thinking about how words impact the way that
Mhm.
we think about things, but also it's so like, it's such a simple a two-word phrase that carries so much, like, you know exactly what that is.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that people are kinda trying to push back against maybe the terminologies that they themselves maybe helped create, right? Which just shows like, okay, we can learn as we go and we can improve upon things because sometimes things seem like a great idea, and then a year later you're like, "Hmm, I don't like that now," or "That could have been done better." So it's cool that they're kinda trying to call some of that stuff out and try to improve it a little bit.
Yeah, and another phrase that, they are not big fans of is uncooperative or problematic behavior, which is sometimes a phrase that is used to describe victims, for example, bailing their abuser out of jail or
Mm,
choosing to not press charges or continuing to talk to their abuser, things that to the law enforcement, it seems like is uncooperative or problematic. But what it is coping,
mhm.
maladaptive coping, or I mean, you could argue adaptive coping. You learn to survive, but
Yeah.
it's coping. And so I think, yeah, it was a session that was definitely pushing a lot of buttons, and I'm very grateful that I had therapy that Thursday to talk through it. But yeah, you were talking about the response in your brain, and I had mentioned amygdala, and that was one of the sessions that I went to on day 2, I think. It was a presentation by Dr. Katie Truitt called Silence, Shame, and Guilt Amongst Domestic Violence Victims and Survivors. And this one was very much focused on what happens in the brain of survivors of trauma, of
Mhm.
abuse. And she talked about the amygdala and how the amygdala doesn't draw from a full range of nuanced data. It operates from trauma wired neural pathways, which is what you were just saying, Sarah.
Beep-a-dee-doo, I go to therapy. And everyone listening might have to go after listening to our podcast. But you know what? Everybody needs therapy at some point in their life. Everybody
Uh,
needs therapy.
Everyone, it's like you do oil changes on your car,
Yep.
you change the what are they called? The struts and
A
the brake
girl,
pads,
you've topped me out on my car knowledge. Gas,
the
oil,
rotors. You got to maintain that.
tires get
The
rotated.
tires, you gotta maintain that machine. Guess what, people? We are human machines, and our fucking brain is the most intricate computer. It needs some maintenance.
But it's true. Like people are so obsessed with like working out and taking care of their bodies. And your brain is also part of your body. And it is also the part of your body that controls the rest of your fucking body. Like it doesn't matter if you eat perfectly and you exercise. Like if you're not taking care of your mental health, it's all gonna go to shit anyways. So it is very important. And it can just help you understand things like this, right? Like understanding why you're reacting to things or what your triggers are or how to de-escalate. Um, and I feel like I'm going off subject maybe, but like I feel like that has been something that I have talked to my therapist about struggling with as I came to terms with, what happened to me, which is the idea of trusting your gut and trusting your instinct, and then feeling like you can't trust your instinct after something like this happens to you because you didn't see all the red flags and you didn't see how problematic it was and you didn't get out. And then it makes it really hard. It can make it really hard to like trust yourself moving forward of like, oh, well, I made that giant. But again, it's that messaging, right? If I made this giant mistake and I let this thing happen to me, it's that self blame. but it can really impact your ability to like trust your spidey senses
Mhm.
after, which can then also make you very dysregulated in feeling endangered when you're not, right? Because your whole fucking nervous system is jacked up, which is why I do think understanding the true science behind what happens to people's bodies and minds after trauma is fascinating and really important.
Yeah. It was a really interesting presentation, learning about the neurobiology of survival. One of the things that the presenter mentioned is that silence, shame, and guilt, they're all survival strategies. And if anything, I think sometimes people can think, if I have all this shame, I have all this guilt, I'm such a broken person. But this presentation was suggesting that maybe that's really an adaptive person. It's a person
Mhm.
that is doing what they need to do to survive the situation that they're in. And even something like shame or guilt, it gives the person, the victim, some kind of sense of control, because if they say like, "Oh, well, I it's my fault. I made him mad."
Mhm.
They're able to, in their mind, okay, that's something I can control. I can try to not make him mad next time. So
Mhm.
it's all survival, and it takes a long, long time, and maybe with the help of psychedelics, but also other ways to rebuild those neural pathways that
Mhm.
that have been your guideline for how to operate in these kinds of situations where you're confronted with triggers or other stimuli that put you back in that place of your abuse. It's fascinating. Our brains are just wow.
They are. It's did you ever read Your Body Keeps a Score?
I haven't read that one. No, I haven't
Or
read that
The
one.
Body Keeps a Score? Yeah, I mean, I will say it's much more textbook based than self-help based, and I think a lot of people get confused by that because when you try to dive into it, it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh shit. This
I
is
heard
like a
it's really
heavy."
dense.
It's very, very dense. But it's got a lot of that kind of information in there where you're reading it and you're just like, "Holy shit." Because as you and I have learned through our, different meetings with people and research, like the long term health outcomes, mental health, physical health, financial health are all fucking impacted for people who are victims of abuse, let alone people of violence, right? Like we're just talking about like child sexual abuse. There's also people that are, in physically abusive relationships, people that are assaulted by strangers, things like that. Like all those things have lifelong implications for people's bodies. And I think it's really important for survivors and the people around survivors to understand that because
Mhm.
I think otherwise it's easy to kind of think, oh, that happened so long ago. Why don't you get over it? Or, why is this person like so high maintenance? Or why is this person always sick? Or like whatever. It's like, there might be a reason for all of those things. And
Yeah.
it might be that they have a shitload of trauma that is just all jacked up in their body and hasn't found a way to come out besides like autoimmune disease, which everyone in the fucking world seems to have now. And it's like, well, is there a reason we all have autoimmune disease? Is it that a bunch of people aren't processing trauma well?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Mhm.
Or our food systems are full of poison. I mean, either way.
As you drink a LaCroix.
Made with essences. I don't know what that means.
Is that a kind of oil? Oh no, wait, that's essential. Another really interesting session that I went to on day two was called "Why Do Domestic Violence Victims Do That? Understanding Victim Response to Offender Tactics." This
Mm.
presenter, I would love to get a non-alcoholic beer with her. She's retired Detective Sandra Campanella. She was a great presenter, and this one was really focused on, kind of like I had mentioned earlier, the maladaptive coping, or what is often called uncooperative or problematic behavior. But some of the interesting things that I learned in this session is that one, statistically, we know domestic violence is mostly a male perpetrated crime with a female victim. And I know we say often that we know that it's that grooming and sexual abuse doesn't discriminate between genders. It happens to everybody. As she was talking about, for example, the argument that people give of, well, why is she still with him, or why doesn't she just leave? Women are at the highest risk of being harmed or killed when they're trying to leave.
Mhm.
So, and that is mind-blowing to think that someone who doesn't know this, right? Someone who doesn't, this isn't their life and they don't talk about this or read about domestic violence or abuse, saying, well, why don't you just leave him, is really saying, why don't you put yourself in a really big risk? And I don't think that like people understand that. So that was something that I was thinking a lot about. Also, that 85% of offenders who kill police are also domestic violence offenders. So
Hmm.
these people are just violent people.
Yeah. That's actually not surprising to me for some reason. Like that seems like a through line that would track because you're a person that is aggressive, is violent, thinks it's okay to be violent and aggressive with others. You've got a lot of practice at it. It's normalized within your behavior and it seems like it'd be easier for you to go and pop off, you know, with somebody else
Yeah.
because you're already escalated all the time. So I
Yeah.
feel like that statistic makes sense. And then I think we've talked about this before, but the idea of, oh, why didn't you just leave? There's so many factors that go into that, like financial instability, like that was a big part of what led me to staying in my abusive relationship with somebody else after the teacher when I was in my 20s. It's like I was broke. I had no money. I couldn't go anywhere. When I left him, I ended up being, you know, homeless, living out of a garbage bag full of clothes and some food, couch surfing for like 2 months, and like that not everybody has a network of people who they can sleep on their
Mm,
couches and crash in their apartments. Like not everyone has that ability to do that. And then there is also, to your point, like the threat of violence escalating just made me think about, yeah, when I left my ex in my 20s, he never really was physical with me, but he like threw stuff at me, yada yada. But I remember I went back to the house that we had lived in together after I had broke up with them and I was couch surfing and I went back to like pack up my stuff or something. And we had made a deal that like he wouldn't be there when I was there. Right? Like that was the agreement because I was like, I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to deal with it. Well, Shaka fucking Rooney, I get there and he's there, but I didn't have a car, so I couldn't leave again because I was poor. I took like a fucking bus there and then walked from the bus station to this like house. And he was sitting in the living room or he was sitting in the kitchen and he was literally dragging a steak knife on his wrists back and forth. Like he wasn't cutting them, but he was just sitting there with a fucking knife. And I remember being
oh my
like, this is
God.
how I die. Like, this is it. I'm going to get fucking stabbed to death by this lunatic. And I like walked right past him, went into the bathroom and locked the door and called my friend. And I was like, you need to come here right now and get me. Like, I have got to get the fuck out of this house. Like, and I haven't thought about that in years. That's crazy. That's not, man, like women, that's the other thing. I feel like we internalize shit so much and we normalize shit so much, or like we
Mm,
just kind of, you have to get through it because you have to get through it, that you don't tend to look back and then you think like that was really scary and that was really dangerous and that really could have been
yeah.
that was like right on the cusp of being a really bad situation. And luckily, like I had a friend that was able to come pick me up and get me out of that house. But again, not everybody has that.
Exactly.
Not everybody has a cell phone to lock
Yeah.
themselves in a bathroom with and call somebody. Like there's just so many factors. I do think it's so shitty when people are like, and you're blaming the victim. It's
Mhm.
never,
I mean,
why didn't you not beat your wife? It's like, why were you such a dumb
yeah.
bitch who stayed with a guy that beat you? It's like, we're yelling at the wrong person right now. Wrong person. Anyways, that was my super sidebar off of what you just
No,
said.
it's not a sidebar. It very much relates. And another thing that the presenter had mentioned, she talked about various laws. In Colorado, if domestic violence happens in front of kids, the perpetrator could also be charged with child abuse,
Mm,
which I think, like, why
makes
isn't that in every state?
that makes
Like,
total sense.
yes. I mean, because it just validates and it really shows like how much witnessing that is, and that's one of the aces. That's one of the adverse childhood
Mhm.
events that leads to poor health outcomes, poor quality of life outcomes. So
Ooh,
I think
explain to our
that's
listeners what that is real quick, because not everybody knows what that
the
test is.
ACE.
Yep.
Oh, so ACEs is, I'm pretty sure you could find it online. It's a short quiz that looks at adverse childhood events. So what some of the things are: did you grow up in a household with domestic violence? Did you grow up single parent home? Did you have a parent who was incarcerated? Were you sexually abused as a kid? Did your parents have substance abuse issues? Like all of these questions,
Mhm.
and then you get a score at the end, and then it gives a breakdown of health outcomes, of just life outcomes, health outcomes, financial
Mhm.
outcomes that are common with people who have the same kind of ACE score.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting. I haven't taken it in a while, so I'm trying to refresh my memory on like what the end result really is. But do you remember like
I
what the
wanna say it's
results are
like
at
if
the end?
you've I mean, I wanna say it was a pretty low, you didn't have to score a lot. Like, I think it's over 4. Because, I mean, the whole point of it is, like, these are ginormous, impactful things that happen when you're young, and it's formative. It truly is formative. I just remember taking it, like, me and my sister took it, and I remember her being like, "Ooh, I slid in right underneath of the radar," and I was like, "Well, I didn't." Like, son of a bitch, you know? Like, not that it necessarily means, like, "Oh, she's fine and I'm not," but, like,
Right.
it was definitely, thanks to our teacher, I was pinged over the tipping edge of that test for sure. But yeah, and then it just talks about, yeah, like if you have, if you're between, 4 and 5, you have this many more odds of having these issues. And if you've got 10, you're going to have this issue, higher likelihood of these other issues, which makes sense. I mean, I think that's like a very fancy way of talking about generational trauma, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't grow up watching one of your parents get the shit beat out of them constantly, and substance abuse problems and food instability and not have it fucking affect who you are. Like, it's just impossible. That's not
Hmm.
how the human mind works. So, anyways, I just wanted you to explain it because you threw it out there. But I feel like that is one of those things that, unless you're kind of in it, you maybe haven't heard of before.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And again, it's you and I and people at this conference. This is the world we live in, right? Either through lived experience or profession or advocacy. So I forget sometimes that the average person might not know what ACEs is. So thank you for that reminder. And the last thing I'll say about that session in particular is another law that I think is really important. And I don't know how many states already have something like this, but it gives people the ability to break a lease, like a rental lease,
Mm.
without penalty if there is situations of domestic violence, because that could also be a reason
Damn, dude.
why women don't leave.
I just had my
Yeah.
laundry list of things, and that's a great one that I would not have ever thought of off the top of my head because I haven't rented in quite a few years now. But like, that's a huge point, dude. Because
Yeah.
like, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, which I was all through my fucking 20s, yeah, you can't break your lease. You can't afford to do that. Like, you have no money, and someone could come after you. I mean, they can charge you for the rent for the rest of your lease. So like, if you're just like trying to get out, the idea of having to pay somebody 900, $1,100 a month for a space you're not living in, like, that's not doable. So that
Yeah.
is also a great suggestion that I see. This is why I love this shit, because there's all these laws that, like, you don't really think about things that just make a lot of fucking sense, but unfortunately people have to advocate for those, and it's a lot of work to get a bill passed and make it into a law. And it's just nice to know there's people out there like thinking of this shit and actually trying to enact these laws is nice to know.
Yeah, it's that was the vibe of the conference. I just felt so grateful for all the people, like the sessions that I attended, the people that I met. I think it was like maybe the last session where I told a room full of people that I really can't wait until my abuser dies. And afterwards, there was a woman who found me and she was like, I'm waiting for that call too. My daughter was murdered. I don't need to figure out that guy. And I was like, I'm telling you, Sarah, these kinds of just
Oh,
like, let me tell you what happened. Yeah, let's just have a moment right now.
yeah.
And yeah, so it just I really want to go back next year. You're coming with me. We're
Fuck
gonna
yeah.
go, and it was so good. It's such an important conference. If hey, listeners, if you know any law enforcement, they have a PD budget, a professional development budget. Encourage them to look into this. It was
Mm.
such a important conference. I had a good time, albeit sometimes uncomfortable. But it was very eye-opening. Oh, and I did want to plug just a couple of the organizations that I spoke with during like the exhibitor time. One is called the Center for Violence for Prevention Research, and they have a science to action network that I love that it exists and knowing that it's out there. So basically, let's say that you work in the community and you want to talk to a researcher. Maybe there's a researcher who's looking to partner with someone in the community. Like you could find people that way. So this was one that I wanted to share about. And then there's this organization called Bloom 365, which is just so fitting,
Ew.
right?
They're
So
gonna be
Bloom
like,
3
these bitches stole our name.
listen, Bloom 365, giving you full credit. Visit bloom365.org. They have the cutest little like chart here about like what's a healthy
Aw.
relationship and what's a wilting relationship. So I'll scan that and send that to you, Sarah. Maybe you can put it on our new website. And then they have these little checklists here, the red flag checklist
Ooh.
about like behaviors of an abusive, controlling, or violent partner. Paws Across Texas, they had therapy
Aw.
dogs there.
Aw.
Um, it was the sweetest thing. I was so happy. I was sitting there petting the puppies. Hi, Mackenzie. Hi, Izzy. Hello, fluffy little white dog whose name I forgot. I'm so sorry.
You're all like,
uh,
can I pet that dog?
I really was. Yeah, so it was a really really good experience. I left just so grateful that I could be there and meet the people that I did, and that even though it took place in a red state like Texas, I mean, I
Mhm.
didn't feel at all threatened or like I wasn't safe. And um yeah, we're going
Well,
back
it's
next year.
a good reminder that only 1/3 of the population in the United States actually voted for Trump. Not half. There are no red states or blue states. There is the Electoral College, which is a bunch of bullshit and should be fucking abolished. We will talk about that some other time. But it is just a reminder that there are good people everywhere and there are bad people everywhere, but there are good people everywhere. And we can't always judge a state by its
By
electoral
its color.
college outcomes. I live in a
That's
state
true.
that has gone red. To be fair, our government in Iowa is hot garbage right now, but there are a lot of really good people in this state that are mad as hell and horrified and pissed off all the time. So it's just a good reminder. Like, if you're lucky enough to live in one of those blue states, god damn it, we're all jealous of you. But there's still a bunch of crazy Republicans in your state too.
Oh
So,
yes. Oh, there are. I
yeah.
have stories for days. They out here. So
Yes. So, anyways.
as I like to say, keep your light on and find the helpers, friends. We'll get through this.
Yeah. Well, and you got to like find your own joy and find a way to help that feels tangible. And I think, you and I are unfortunately passionate about a lot of things. So it's hard sometimes to find the thing, but I think this is our thing, right? And I think it's also interesting that you pointed out the idea that, a lot of these networks exist and these organizations already exist and they're kind of happening in their own silos and trying to find a way to kind of activate the community as a whole. I think is a really interesting one because that's something that's come up a lot of times in different meetings I've had with people. Because even just the idea of like, if you could somehow activate, organize, and focus every survivor of teacher abuse, of sport abuse, of church abuse, of fucking
Medical.
medical abuse, of those goddamn like yell scare 'em straight camps. Like there's all of these people, let alone human trafficking, right? Like there's so many categories of people that experience just childhood abuse, let alone adult abuse. But like, if you could collectively activate all of those people at the same time to like throw their voices behind certain bills or certain like laws and legislation, like that could be really fucking powerful. I think there's a lot of people that feel that way, but it's just how do you ever do it and what is the focus? And that's where it kind of fractures apart, right? Because that's where it gets into legal justice versus prevention, education versus punishment. Like, yeah, that's where things kind of, it's like any good movement, right? It starts to fracture when you start to really dig into the details.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I hope that we can help be maybe a little bridge between some of these groups and organizations. And we do have a resources page on our brand new website where it lists a few, and we can definitely add more to that as we find ones that we think could be helpful to people to look into, not only for like immediate help if you're experiencing abuse or trauma of any kind, but also if you want to get involved in prevention or figure out what your state laws are. Like, there's just so many tools out there, which is really great, but it can be kind of daunting to seek out those resources at the beginning.
I agree, Sarah. We have many interests. I mean, I just wish I could do so much. And I think that that's the way a lot of people are feeling right now is there's so much happening right now. So attacks on civil rights, global wars, like people starving. There's just a lot happening. I think it can feel overwhelming to know like where to help. And yes, I agree. I know that we're trying to do our little part to put a grain of sand, on that big ass hill. And yeah, if listeners are wanting some action items or places to start, I think maybe seeing if your state has some of the laws that we mentioned, like if a perpetrator of domestic violence does that in front of children, is that also considered child abuse in that state? Or does the state that you live in, are victims of domestic violence able to break a lease without financial penalty? Yeah, but at the same time, so one of the reasons why Sarah and I decided to not drop 10 episodes at once of this and why we started off a little bit slower is because of how I felt in that session on that first day, where I felt like I was just getting all this information, and it was information that I knew was helpful and good in the end, but like physically it was just overwhelming. And we don't want to do that to our listeners. As another reminder to take care of yourselves. And yeah, thank you for listening about the caca. And we will be there next year.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
excited to go
excited.
with you next year, Diana. Thank you for going and representing our podcast that wasn't even out yet
Oh,
in
I told so many
retrospect.
people about it. Yeah.
In retrospect, we probably could have launched that before, but whatever. It is what it
Yeah.
is. But yeah, I would love to go with you next year. And I think it would be a really cool experience. And we could even like record from down there. And, you know,
Hmm.
I think my sexual abuse survivor greeting cards would have really gone over well down there. And I feel like it was a real missed opportunity.
Okay, well, there's next year, and now you have time to make some more.
It's true. Because especially when you're talking about like your victim impact statement as like a healing thing, I was like, oh man, my victim impact statement card would have been the perfect parting gift for that seminar. So, anyways, I am looking
Next year.
forward to it next year. Yes, keep me posted.
I am so happy that I am the kind of person who starts all the way at the beginning when I start a new podcast. Otherwise, who knows if I would have ever heard about the Conference on Crimes Against Women. I cannot express how much I loved it, the energy, the people. I learned so many things, and I'm really looking forward to going back. Maybe we will see you there. Okay, goodbye now. Thank you for listening to this Bloom bonus, and we will see you with our ears next time. Bye.